Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today's topic of discussion will be focused around reducing churn through customer advisory boards. So stay tuned.
So Jennifer, why don't you kick it off and talk about kind of what are customer advisory boards? If people don't know what they are, like what are these things?
Sure. So a customer advisory board is it's a special use panel. It includes either your customers or your prospects, and you ask these folks. It could be anywhere from 40 to 4,000 of them, and you ask them to participate for usually a year. It could be 6 months, and then throughout the year, you ask them questions about their relationship with your company, if that's appropriate, or about special needs that you have and that your business has. So for example, you can do a lot of product or concept testing, marketing or sales messaging testing. You can use it for even branding or repositioning type studies as well.
So Jennifer, are these the same people? So you said 40 to 4,000. So are you getting these people together for this? It's the same people every time that you're reaching out to for these things?
Yes. So these 40 or these 4,000 people agree, you send them an invitation, you ask them to participate for a year on your customer advisory board. And you give them parameters, you give them expectations for how many times you're going to ask them to participate. And then they're there for you to talk to over the course of the year.
Why would a company consider forming one of these boards? Like what's the business case for it? What's the rationale?
Yeah, so it's an easier and less expensive way to conduct market research than doing what we call one-off market research studies. So if you know that over the course of the year that you want to, you have a lot of work to do on either customer retention or building your new customer pipeline, you would have one of these in place so that you could reach out to your key audience over the course of that year. And then also, if you're a customer-centric organization and you really, really want to get to know your customers and your prospects very well, it's a great way to do it because you can just really get them. It's almost like ethnographic. You can get them while doing whatever it is they do that's important to you over the course of the year and talk to them at that time.
People who watch PeopleMetrics Live know we talk a lot about voice of the customer and customer experience, and we've talked over many episodes about how important it is to identify a moment of truth and really focus in on it. So it might be post-call, after a service call, and you want to survey every customer that does a post-service call with you and really understand that experience, follow up with the people who had a poor experience, et cetera. What I want to talk about and make sure everybody knows is this is a complementary approach to that. So while in that circumstance, you're serving every customer, right? No matter who it is. What this is really doing is taking a group of your customers, and ideally, Jennifer, these should be a random sample. You shouldn't be cherry picking these customers, should you?
Correct. Although
right?
you can target particular types of customers that are valuable to you.
Right. But you wouldn't want to say, okay, these are our best customers or our most friendly customers necessarily. If you wanted to have a representative kind of opinion of what's going on.
Right.
But yeah, so this is a great complement to that, I believe. So while you're doing what we would consider a traditional voice of the customer program where you're surveying after a key touch point, what this is really allowing you to do is take a group of customers, and like Jennifer said, it could be just a handful, 40, which is really low, or it could be lots of customers, depending on how many customers you have. And then really, I call it like partnering with your customer and having a consistent dialogue for a period of time on things that are really important to you. Now, this could be experiential type things, like we have clients, right, that ask Net Promoter Score for some of these interactions, right? So what's your relationship like? And get into that. And then there's some other parts, right, that Jennifer, that are much more, what's the topic of the day? What's a strategic issue that you really need to know about? So instead of, like Jennifer said, research is usually done by, oh, we have this problem. Now we got to find the people to answer it, right? That's always the biggest biggest kind of concern when you're doing research, right? But with a advisory board, that concern goes out the window and you can focus more on what do we need to ask and what are the results.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
So
it doesn't have to be a particular, actually, that's one of the secrets of having a good customer advisory board that's beneficial to your company, is to actually build in some serendipitous type of interactions too. So you just ask, you don't have an agenda in mind, but you ask your customers, like, what's up with you guys? What's going on with you? And the things that you learn can be really helpful to you in both understanding your customer, but also to your business. An example of that is during COVID, we did a lot of that with our customer advisory boards. I mean, it's still pandemic, but we asked a lot of, like, just, what are you doing? What's up? How are you handling this? And we actually, through that, identified for one of our clients an opportunity, which was a lot of the employers the companies that we were talking to needed someone to help them with vaccination administration. When that was being required by the administration, companies needed help with that, and we helped our client understand that they could offer that type of service, and they did it very successfully.
that's really interesting. So Jennifer, if you were just starting, like, how do you choose the customers to start on a customer advisory board? Like, where do you even begin on such a thing if someone was interested in creating one of these?
Yeah, so we have lists, and we ask our customers for lists. It kind of depends on whether you're going to focus on customers or prospects. And we're definitely able to help with prospects and getting prospective customers involved. It's great to think about not just your end users. So we work with a lot of B2B oriented businesses. So there can be a lot of different stakeholders, but different kinds of customers. Like, for example, in pharma, you have the end users who use the medications, the patients, but then you've got physicians who are really intermediaries, and they're almost just as important as the patients. And then there are payers and other kinds of intermediaries as well. Or in the insurance business, you have the folks who file claims and have an insurance policy, but then you've got the employers and the brokers who are financial advisors, who are also have a lot of input into a lot of purchase decisions. So having either representation of all those different kinds of customers, or focusing an advisory board on one of those audiences, you can go either way.
I just want to delve into something you said. So it can be prospects, it can be customers, and it can be branded and unbranded, right? I know we have something later, but I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that. Why would you want it to be sponsored, to have the sponsor known to your customer, and why would you want it not to be known sometimes? And I think that's a really interesting kind of distinction.
It is, and it's really important because that's really one thing that you have to know in advance. Are you going to use the customer advisory board mainly for operational improvements and increasing or improving retention? And if that's the case, then you would want to have customers rather than prospects, because these are kind of organizational improvements, and you're working on retention. And if it's customers, then it's great to have it branded. To have the customer advisory board branded. Because it helps improve your recruitment of the folks that you want to include on the advisory board. But also, it really reflects well on you. We see and hear this all the time, that customers really value that our clients invest in these customer advisory boards. They see it as a real attempt to understand what's important to them. On the other hand, if you know in advance that you want to do a lot of more competitive work, you really want to build your new sales pipeline, or if you want to do any kind of repositioning or rebranding, then having a panel where the sponsor is not identified might be a better idea, because then you get input without the respondent knowing who is paying for the whole venture, and you'll get more unbiased feedback.
Jennifer, is it more difficult to put together one that's unbranded, given that you're not like attaching a name to it? I'm talking about from the respondent perspective, from the member perspective on the board.
Yeah, the participation rate will be lower. So you'll send out 1,000, invitations, and you'll get, maybe, 2 or 3% respond and agree to participate. With customers, the participation rate's a lot higher. Yeah, and we've done some really creative things with Unbranded, where we create a satellite brand that is not actually associated with the end client at all. And that entity becomes kind of the brand, the face of the brand of the customer advisory board. And then, the members of that CAB don't know who the sponsor is, but they still can say, oh, I'm a member of, and they have a name for it.
That's great. That's really a great suggestion and insight. So one of the things that we talked about also on PeopleMetrics Live, as Alexandra knows, is high impact customers, right? These customers that are really important to your business in certain industries like B2B. It's most of your customers in certain B2C industries. It may be like the small percentage of your customers that generate a lot of your business. It seems like a customer advisory board would be especially important for industries that lean towards having what we would call these high impact customers.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yep. One of the reasons is that it's these folks are their opinion is controls a lot of income, just to put it bluntly. So if it's like a B2B type audience, one decision maker at some large company is going to mean millions of dollars to your business. So having their opinion and understanding really in a lot of detail what it is they need and want can be very important.
One of the things we keep talking about with high impact customers is you really have to know them very well. And while the customer experience industry continues to move towards kind of automating understanding through AI and machine learning, which is great in certain circumstances. In other circumstances, when you hundreds or thousands of customers or clients rather than millions, that's a hard approach, and you really need to have deep customer understanding. And that seems like customer advisory boards allow deep customer understanding, especially because, as you mentioned, it can be surveys, but you could also be doing really in-depth interviews with these folks, correct? Like it doesn't have to be just a survey with them.
Yeah, and actually we do a lot of qualitative, and we find that among like executives and among physicians or a lot of high impact customers, they really appreciate having a conversation where you listen to them. They can say as much as they like. You kind of guide the conversation, but you're really letting them be as intelligent and as what's the word? I don't want to say powerful, but like you just give them the stage and let them talk. And that's really part of the experience of the customer advisory board that I think really lends itself to learning more about these folks. And another thing that we specialize in, because we do a lot of B2B CABs, customer advisory boards, is that we have learned to provide a white glove type experience to our members. So it's really important to keep the members happy just as members, because you want them to be engaged. You try to make the experiences positive and engaging, and showing them how much we value them throughout the course of the engagement.
So it would seem like in those circumstances, if you have like a high impact customer group that isn't millions, it's like I said, thousands of customers, clients, this having a CAB, customer advisory board alone, might be a way to strengthen relationships with those on the board, potentially reduce churn, because churn's important for every business, right? No doubt. And you can't name a business where it's not important, but it seems like for the industries we've been talking about today, especially high impact customer industries, churn becomes vital because losing just one client hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just talking to those, those key customers, the 80-20 rule, if you're talking to that 20% that control 80% of your revenue, if you talk with them on a regular basis, you're more likely to understand their needs overall.
Mhm.
And then, if you give them space, to tell you what's important to them, you're a lot more likely to be able to provide it, and provide it, quickly. You're not just going to hear about it, anecdotally through your, through a customer service department. You're going to be proactively going out and trying to understand what are their needs right now, today, and you kind of doing that throughout the course of the year.
So, I can't see a reason why every company at a certain size shouldn't have one of these, right? Like it seems to just, there's no downside. It makes a lot of sense. So let's say our audience is like bought in, like, yeah, these seem like a great idea. Customer advisory board seems like a great idea. Why don't we go through what are the key decisions you have to make when you're forming one of these? Because there are some things, these aren't just, you just don't snap your fingers and one of these comes together, right? There's a lot of decisions you have to make.
Yes,
And
I do not have a job. Yes. Very important.
So Alexandra, I think we have a slide on this, right?
Yes.
Some detail. All right. So
Right.
let's go to the next slide. Right. So Jennifer, right? So design's everything in these, right? Like with every good customer experience or market research program, how you design it determines its success.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
there's some key decisions, right? We have to make. So this is the first one. You've touched on it. Why don't you just touch on it again real quickly so everybody kind of understands this?
Yep.
Because this is so important.
Yeah, and it's not actually sponsored or unsponsored. It's really, are you revealing to your CAB members who the sponsor is? And like I said earlier, a lot of times if you want to have the focus be on operational improvements, or building customer or improving customer retention, that's when you would really probably opt for a sponsored customer advisory board among customers. And then if you wanted to have the focus really be on a customer pipeline or things that are more competitive nature, then you would probably opt to have prospects on your advisory board, and then have it be unbranded.
Right. So this just simply means if PeopleMetrics was doing a customer advisory board, we might have PeopleMetrics come out and say, hey, clients, we're putting together this board and it's PeopleMetrics sponsored. The other hand, if we wanted to understand what all of our buyers are thinking of the whole market, we might not have PeopleMetrics attached to the advisory board. We might call it something else, like the customer insights, because the customer insights something, right? I'm just making this up on the fly.
Yeah.
The customer insights, the customer insights live group.
Yeah.
And we'll go through and call it something, right? But we wouldn't say it's PeopleMetrics, and we would then recruit people to be in that. And then we could ask about PeopleMetrics, our competitors, anything else we'd want to talk about without it being biased towards like PeopleMetrics clients.
That's right.
All right. So what's the next key decision you have to make?
Yeah, so the next one really is how many members. And like I said earlier, we, anywhere from 40 to 4,000. We've done, I've managed a customer advisory board among 60 members. This was for a financial services firm that had a very small elite client base. So 60 really did represent, it wasn't a census, it wasn't all of their customers, but it represented a really high proportion of the number of their customers. And we also have a customer advisory board now that's close to 4,000 members. And that's one that is unbranded. We do a lot of quantitative research where it's really advantageous to have a larger pool to draw from, and that therefore when you get the results back, the results can be really reliable. meaning you can really take business action on these exact findings because it will project to a larger population. For that advisory board, that's 4,000. That's about half who are business purchase decision makers and about half intermediaries, so like financial advisors and brokers on that one.
Yeah, we just got back from a rare disease conference in Boston, and there's some products that only have 50 or so patients on the product, and that would be perfect for a very small customer advisory board, correct? Like you can do that with as few as you really wanted to, and then follow them. That might be all the feedback you'll ever need when you have populations that small, correct?
That's exactly right. If the population were 50, then if you have 10, you've got a really good representation of your patient base on that advisory.
Yeah. And we use these ranges loosely. So right, so there could be 10 there, but even if you had an enormous customer base and you wanted to just hone in on your best customers, it's not like you have to have every one of them. You can randomly sample and get to a few thousand, and we think that would probably suit you.
And another consideration is segments that you need to cover. So for some of our B2B clients, for example, there are, small, mid-size, and large companies that are all, part of their client base. So they want to have make sure that they have representation on the customer advisory board of each of those three groups and in relatively equal numbers. So usually we'll do, maybe 100 in each of those groups so that the results can be analyzed. Any kind of feedback can be analyzed by the segment.
That's great.
For patients, like if that example you just gave, it's a rare disease state, and you want to have 10 people on your advisory board, then maybe you would split up men versus women, or East Coast versus West Coast for whatever reason. So that's another consideration in terms of setting how large the customer advisory board will be.
Excellent. What's the next consideration that we have here? This is important, right? So this is getting people to actually do this.
Exactly. Yes. Show me the money. So it is very common to actually pay members. So you can pay them cash, you could pay them in gift cards. But it's important to decide decide the right amount at the beginning, and communicate that as you're inviting people. Another way to incentivize is, we'll talk about that next, but frequency is also important. So are you going to pay them all at the end? Do you feel like that's going to be more enticing and then more valuable? They can get, a few $100s at the end, or are you going to divide it up and pay them, quarterly? Or you could pay by interaction. In some scenarios, that is a good way to go. Like after every interaction, you will, hit send on a electronic Visa gift card, and then you've paid them, and they know, okay, my time is valuable, and I'm getting what I was promised, right away and seamlessly.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, and the next one, Alexandra. Oh, yes. So before we get to this one, can you give us just a ballpark on what we're typically paying people to participate in one of these? Like how much are people looking at?
Yeah, so for business decision makers or brokers, we're paying, can be anywhere from $300 to $500 for a year. The commitment is usually for a year. And you set expectations up front about how much time you're going to ask of them over the course of the year. So it's usually 3 hours or so over the course of a year. And in return, they'll get this. You can call it a stipend or an incentive or an honoraria. There are a lot of different names for it, depending on how you want to brand yourself. And the other thing I wanted to mention is it's really good to offer what's best for the demographic you're going to include. So if you're, you could pay by Venmo if you want, if that, seems like that's the best way to go with the group that's going to be on your board. We've done studies, or we've done interactions where Venmo is a good way to pay people. Or if you want to use like Visa gift cards, if that's easy for everybody. Checks can sometimes be easier. Like if it's like AARP and you have like older folks who really don't want to do PayPal or Venmo, then you can just send them checks.
So this sharing findings is an interesting one. Tell us a little bit about why that's important.
Yeah, so for some types of members, and brokers come to mind, but it could be physicians, it could be anybody who's like a subject matter expert.
Yep.
Findings from the research can be even more valuable to them than money. Or, if they're high earners, if they're like investors and they, a couple $100 isn't going to mean much to them, sometimes findings will be more important. And the way we usually do that is you can kind of peel off some of the findings from your studies so that you're not giving away like kind of strategic insights that are important to keep confidential for your company. You're pulling out insights that are a little more general, but still, maybe industry focused or subject matter focused. That's going to be valuable to members. Like for example, you can do, if you have on this large customer advisory board, you can do like a max diff if you want to learn about how to offer a new product or service. But at the end, you can ask some questions that are industry, whatever's topical, whatever's really important at that time. And then you can offer those findings back to your members.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, how about the next one? You touched on this, but it is important to be upfront, right, on how much time and effort we're talking about, correct, to get them to be engaged.
Really important. And that's part of that white glove experience. Like you really want to set expectations and then be really like scrupulous about meeting those expectations. Because if it's sponsored, you're acting on behalf of your clients. So it's really important to make them look good at every single touch point that you're interacting with members.
So it seems like the most common time period would be a year. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yeah, usually a year, and usually we recommend interacting once a month. That seems to be the sweet spot. A lot of times, that'll vary depending on your business and your what's happening in your industry at the moment. But usually it's a month. That is enough to keep folks engaged and to remember you, the members. But you're not bothering them. It's like a once a month, and it could be a quick little survey 1 month, so you're not using up too much of your 3 hours. But then another time it could be, an hour-long interview, or you could ask them to participate in a focus group, or some kind of brainstorming session.
Yeah, this is really great. And then do we have one more?
One more.
You got to name it. See, I couldn't name my tab on the fly, so that's obviously a hard thing to do, and an important thing to do.
It's hard, but it's fun. You can imagine there's a lot of ideas that come up, and it's, I've had really good naming sessions with clients. We can help. If it's branded, you can be really fun if your brand is really fun. But typically, we work with more kind of conservative companies, and we usually call it a customer advisory board or a round table or a panel, or something like that, or something like customer first initiative, something like that. But you can,
Jennifer, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're heading towards the end of PeopleMetrics Live, but I know you've been doing this so long, you must have a couple more secrets for the audience that you could share, just between us and just our friends here on all things customer advisory boards. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier kind of in passing, which is the cherry picking of samples. So this is really crucial when you're setting up this customer advisory board. It's really important that you don't just kind of walk over to your sales folks and ask them for names and contact information, because salespeople, everybody is this way. They want you to hear from the happiest people that they work with. And then what you'll get at the end is a lot of happy, joy, when that's not necessarily always the case. And you want unbiased feedback. So it's important to get some independent contact information.
That's a great secret. Any other secrets that you think that the audience would get value out of before we depart?
Yeah, definitely. I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but it's worth saying again, is like building in some time for serendipity, for just being really open and having no agenda and seeing what's on people's minds. I think that's really a valuable piece of this type of initiative. And you'll really be surprised about what you learn, and your customers will be glad that you care enough to do that.
That sounds like great advice for CABS research and just in life in general. Don't have an agenda, don't bias the responses, get a clean read on what's on their minds. You'll get a lot out of it.
All right, well, I'm gonna squeeze in a little bit more time. We do have 2 questions in. First one is, what's the time frame to implement a CAB program?
Jennifer, if you get a new client and they're like, yeah, I want to do this, what are we talking about from the time they say yes to the time like the CAB actually gets launched and the first interaction happens?
Yeah, so usually, I mean, there's the period of kind of working out the contract and stuff can take a while, but once you've decided that you want to move forward, it can, really just a few, at least a few weeks to get, you need to get your lists together. You need to develop all of the onboarding information. So we would draft, an invitation, a screening type of tool to make sure that you're getting the right folks on your advisory board, and then some kind of a questionnaire or survey as an onboarding exercise for folks. So usually that takes at least three weeks to get that all in order.
But depending on the size, I would imagine, of the CAB, customer advisory board, it might take longer than that. So if it was a unbranded 4,000 person board, that might take a lot longer than something that's one of the other examples. On the other side, we said a very small board that, we could recruit, 50 people on.
That's right.
Yeah. So a lot depends, but 4 weeks, 8 weeks, this isn't going to take forever, but it does take some planning.
All right. And then lastly, what's the typical price range to run a CAB program?
Yeah, that really varies. It could, if it's 10 people, it could be, 50, 60,000. I've worked on CABs that can, they go up to like $500,000 a year. It's entirely dependent on, whether it's going to be quantitative or qualitative interactions, how many members you need, how many interactions over the course of the year, and then like how expensive are these folks to entice? If you've got doctors, or any kind of subject matter experts, their time is pretty valuable. So you need to have budget for that.
This is, I know Alexandra's gonna like cut me off and say this. We probably have another PeopleMetrics Live at some point in the future, just talking about how this can really save you money in the long run versus doing one-off market research. That we just touched on it, but you're throwing out those numbers. It seems like a lot, but when you think about research and customer experience budgets and how much it costs to go out individually over time, fresh, that's ultimately going to wind up at a much higher price than using a single board over a year, typically.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. It ends up being much less expensive in terms of recruiting costs. All sorts of, when you go out and use panels, meaning large market research panels, I don't want to name names, but, you can end up throwing out a lot of the responses, and it takes a lot of time to QC and to vet and to really screen the right respondents. But if you have a customer advisory board, you really have a lot of confidence that these are the folks that are either your customers or your prospects, the folks that you really want to be hearing from.
Alexandra, I think we have another PeopleMetrics Live in our future. We're going to see Jennifer again. We may.
Yes. You're a welcome guest whenever you'd like to share your expertise.
Yes.
Yes, well, thank you both for sharing all this wonderful, insightful information about CAB programs. And thank you all for joining in. We'll see you next time on PeopleMetrics Live. Take care.